With the upcoming release of Battlefield 6 and the open beta sealed in the books, let's take a quick peek at what this game is starting to look like. Battlefield 6 is the newest expansion in the video game franchise. The Battlefield series, developed primarily by DICE and published by Electronic Arts, or EA as we've come to know, is one of the most iconic and influential first-person shooter franchises in gaming history. Known for its large-scale warfare, combined arms combat, class-based gameplay, and objective-focused multiplayer modes, it has consistently aimed for epic, immersive battlegrounds. For over 2 decades, the Battlefield series has consistently pushed the boundaries of large-scale multiplayer combat, adapting to different eras and technologies while largely maintaining its core identity of combined arms, class-based teamwork, and environmental destruction. Despite occasional missteps, it remains a pillar of the FPS genre, celebrated for its epic sandbox battle experiences. So first, we'll take a look at some of the weapons in the game, the classes and gadgets, some of the vehicles, and also some of the game modes that are involved. We'll also take a look at the aspects of gameplay and overall how this game seems to come out. First off, with the weapons, there are attachment points now, so no longer are there availability for putting as many or as little attachments as you'd like. The better the attachment, the higher the point it costs. Caps at 100, and these are attachments for barrels, muzzle devices, top and right side rails, magazines, 2 separate optics for primary and candid, ammo, and magwell. Some attachments drastically help, but for the most part, you're not going to see a lot of difference. Only really 3 options or less for weapons per weapon class, but obviously since it's a beta, there will most likely be much more upon arrival of the game. That said, most guns are difficult to use at range, and time to kill is kinda high if your aim isn't the best. Something new to the weapon system is that you can now use any weapon with any class. However, this is only outside of closed weapon conquest. We'll talk more about closed weapon conquest in a little bit, but if you want to use the sniper with the assault class, you can now do that. Assault rifles have decent attachments, decent recoil, and decent reliability overall. One of my favorite assault rifles ended up being the AK build, which is essentially the NVO. It has some decent recoil and pretty cool attachments. It also has a higher rate of damage. DMRs have the most recoil and are hardest to use overall, in my opinion. Most start with a magnified scope, and it's at least 3 shots to kill. So mixed with the recoil, it's pretty hard to use these guns right off the bat. SMGs are fast shooting and overall pretty reliable, but terrible at range and run out of ammo pretty quickly. Carbines, on the other hand, are similar to the assault rifles, but have better mobility for the most part, with the M4A1 being the first available carbine. The M4 is very reliable and most people tended to use this during the beta. However, my favorite was the AK205. It's very stable, shoots like a laser beam, doesn't have the highest damage, but in my opinion the best overall gun. Shotguns are basic and only offer 1 pump action option. Once again, this is probably only because of the beta, but shotguns have customization, but only buckshot, flechette, and slug options for ammo. Let's be honest though, as gamers, I think we've all been waiting for Dragon's Breath ammo for a pretty long time. I feel like this would have been a good opportunity for them to put it in. However, hopefully in the final product, there might be some Dragon's Breath ammo. LMGs are awesome, but pretty clunky and slow you down. I wouldn't recommend using one, however, unless it's Conquest and you're genuinely trying to give support. As for pistols, there is only one option for the pistol, and it's decent but not much to critique. Pretty easy to shoot, decent ammo, decent recoil. Finally, snipers. I'll be honest, sniping has always been my favorite aspect of Battlefield, and though it took me like 2 to 3 hours to get used to the sniping, the counter sniping, I feel like at first, it's a pretty difficult aspect of the game. The way the map is designed, players exploit cheap angles and hard to reach spots, so if you're moving around as a sniper, expect to have a hard time. That said, the only option for sniping was actually a pretty good gun, and I had fun trying to work it right. Other than actual weapons, we have throwables and melee. The melee option is just one knife, but I'm sure there will be other options down the road like all the other Battlefields. For throwables, the only options are frag, smoke, and flash, depending on the class. Frag is quick and efficient, but doesn't get a lot of kills because of enemy consistent movement. The flash, from what I saw, was pretty ineffective, but much like everything else, right time, right place. The smoke, however, was your typical smoke grenade that covers a small area. I will say the smoke was actually pretty useful on certain game modes, and much like everything else, you kind of need to get your rhythm and learn how to use it first. I will say that the smoke grenade was actually a pretty good replacement if you don't mind losing out on the extra explosives. As for the classes and gadgets, we have 4 classes much like the historic Battlefield games. First is the Assault class. The Assault class has a field spec of Frontliner. The Frontliner's signature gadget is an adrenaline injector, which pretty much takes about 2 seconds to inject and allows you to sprint faster, take less explosive damage, and make footsteps easier to hear. There is also reduced fall damage with this class. Field spec could not be changed from what I saw. However, once again, this is a beta. Maybe it changes in the final product. Also, the more you play as the class in game, the more perks show up, such as extra adrenaline shot or quick recovery. Personally, this was my favorite class to use during the beta because of the balance of firepower, speed, and reliability. If there was a tank downrange or at least a little bit of a distance, I could actually still manage to inflict damage on the tank by using 1 or 2 of the gadgets. This also gives the Assault class an advantage on at least weapon-to-weapon combat and still have a chance against a tank at the same time. The gadgets are either a combat shotgun, a thermobaric explosive, or a high explosive launcher. The shotgun wasn't my favorite personally, just because of the range. You have to be pretty close to the enemy in order to be effective with a shotgun. The thermobaric is a grenade launcher that does minimal damage upon impact, but essentially lights the enemy on fire during recurring damage over time. The damage is obviously fire. I didn't get a lot of kills with this one, but it was perfect for controlling enemies' movement. Finally, the high explosive launcher is your typical run-of-the-mill launcher that does heavy damage against enemies on foot. The third slot gadget can also be replaced with certain weapons, so essentially if you wanted, you can run 2 separate rifles. Moving on to the engineering class, the field spec is anti-armor, where the signature trait is flak jacket. This pretty much reduces explosive damage by about 33%. The significant gadget is the usual repair tool we've seen in past battlefields in order to quickly repair tanks. Some of the perk upgrades include extra rockets, quicker reloads for rockets, and armor debilitator. This is where doing damage on other tanks makes it harder to repair. The gadgets for engineer are either surface-to-air launcher, an RPG, a motion sensor mine, which is pretty much a claymore for tanks. I will say I was actually pretty surprised with how accurate the RPG was. It didn't corkscrew off into the distance, it shot straight, did pretty good damage, and sometimes I found myself counter-sniping with the RPG. Moving on to the support class. The field spec is a combat medic with a special trait as quick revive. This means you can essentially get people up pretty quickly. I didn't time it, but I would say less than half a second. Upgrades include health packs, health recovery upon reviving a teammate, and improved stats for all defensive gadgets. Overall, this was a pretty fun class, but underutilized by most players. Medic is primary, yet a lot of people forget to revive down players. However, we've seen this in past battlefields as well. Gadgets include the defibrillator to revive down teammates and a deployable shield for cover. Next we have Recon, and this is the sniper's dream. It's a class where your signature trait is auto spot. This is where when you look at hostiles, it pretty much marks them. It's a pretty difficult class to use at first, but easily learnable and really fun once you get the hang of it. I'd say it took me about 2 to 3 hours, maybe a little bit more, to fully dive in and be immersed in the sniper class. It was pretty difficult at first. I found myself missing shots, I found myself moving too much, and I just kept getting outgunned. However, the more I played, the more I got the hang of it, and I'm sure everybody can learn this and become good at it. The gadgets are simple, they include C4 explosives and a motion sensor style UAV. The C4 was kind of a surprise to me because usually that's part of the support class, but honestly, I kind of dig it. The vehicles in Battlefield 6 are pretty cool. Though there are an assortment of transport vehicles and minorly armored or weaponized vehicles, the tanks and helicopters shine the brightest. The air vehicles weren't overly supreme during the beta, at least what I played, so I didn't get a good glimpse at what we're looking at as far as fighting helicopters, fighting jets, but the little bit that I did see, it didn't seem too drastic. We didn't have a hard time getting bullied, I guess I would say. Getting bullied from helicopters or jets. It was a pretty overall fun experience. The tanks, however, are pretty awesome. Whether you're the driver or the secondary gunner, the tank warfare is really smooth. Tank battles are some of the funnest experiences in the beta as long as there is communication. Myself and my friend managed to play a lot in the tank, and we managed to actually turn a lot of the tides of conquest and breakthrough. Overall, I'd say the tanks are pretty much where it's at. As far as the game modes, at least in the beta, we had King of the Hill, Conquest, Breakthrough, Domination, and a little bit of a new concept called the Closed Weapon Conquest. King of the Hill felt smooth. It's a small map style, it's a little bit chaotic, but overall pretty fun. There's no cars, tanks, or air, but teams take turns trying to occupy objectives to gain points. Pretty simple, first team to 250 points wins. It's pretty much like Headquarters or Hardpoint if anybody's played Call of Duty in the past. So now, there's two different types of conquests. There's our regular conquest that we all know and love. Huge maps, but objectives are kind of close to each other. Fun but disorientating at times, to the point to when you spawn it takes a second to figure out where you need to head next. Tanks and air are not heavily dominant, so the Battlefield 2042 issue of getting bullied by tank or air supremacy isn't really present. It's definitely an improvement since the last. Closed Weapon Conquest, on the other hand, locks your weapons to class-specific options. So, if you play as Assault, you're only going to have weapons and gadgets designated to that specific class. Domination, much like we already know, is a small-scale battle. No tanks, no air. Capture the objective and hold it before the other team can cap. The team with the most points wins the game. And finally, my favorite game mode, Breakthrough. This is pretty much Rush, if you remember. It's an awesome game mode. It's pretty hard as attacking, but helps if the defenders aren't helping their team and just trying to snipe from outside the objective, or better yet, just playing from outside of the objective. I personally won only once or twice on the attacking side, just because it is pretty chaotic. It's very fun, but very difficult. Easier as a defender, much harder as an attacker. As far as the new aspects of gameplay, I will say there are some pretty cool new things, but also some pretty cool old things. Counter-sniping is still a little difficult, but the maps are cool, with some being much more fun to play than others. I believe we only really got 3 maps during the beta, but all 3 were pretty enjoyable. The queue to enter the game goes by pretty quickly, so I'm not worried about any future issues with lack of players. The wait times during the beta to search for a game was not terrible. However, I was a bit worried just because it does take some time going from game to game if you choose to not return to the main menu. With a beta full of players, that tells me it might just be a game-sided issue. There were no real bugs that I came across. There was maybe 1 or 2 little minor visual details that kind of messed up the game, but the beta was pretty well polished. If it were to be released today, I would say there's not many issues that we need to worry about. However, while playing with friends, sometimes we would need to close the party and restart it because some would not enter the game with the rest. Battlefield 6 beta was going really well with a lot of players. However, so did Battlefield 2042. That beta was awesome. However, the actual game fell apart. So we do gotta ask ourselves, will this happen again? I personally think no, which is why I pre-ordered. Something new to the game is very important though, for PC players. Now, it requires safe boot and to have TPM in. There's many videos on YouTube that can help you with secure boot. I wouldn't worry too much about it. But back to the game itself, it's honestly kind of difficult to engage at range. Most times you cannot see the enemy, cannot target acquire easily, and unless you're burst firing, you're probably not going to win the fight. Most deaths are going to come from enemies you don't see. One of the new aspects is that you can drag one of your players. So let's say you're going in, you're trying to revive, you can actually drag them backwards. This is a cool new aspect because honestly, there's a lot of times where your downed friend is going to be in the middle of the road, and if you go for a revive, you might get shot with him. But now you can drag him to safety while trying to revive. One of the aspects that I noticed in the beta is that there's always an enemy behind you, maybe even 2 or 3. And truth be told, sometimes the minimap is kind of useless for the majority of the interactions. It's small, it's kind of out of the way, and it takes away from your vision onto your first person. Like all battlefields, the medics are kind of clueless. I'd say about 50% of the time the medics were reviving us, whereas the other 50% they were kind of just running around trying to get kills. However, this is something we've always dealt with in previous battlefields. Some games were difficult to play alongside medics, then some games the medics were your best friend. Which leads me to my final point. You can change the game, but you can't always change the community. Though this game is awesome to play, I had a blast, some of the members of the community in Battlefield tend to exploit a lot of stuff in the game. However, that's not the game's fault. Medics choose to use the class and have the gadget, but don't choose to actually revive people. It's an issue we've always dealt with, though. Players have seemed to become very shameless about it too, especially snipers, using ratty angles and not even playing the objective. This aspect of Battlefield has become pretty unbearable, but honestly, it's not overwhelmingly frequent, so I'm not worried about it. Overall, this game is fun and honestly pretty addictive at some points. The fast gameplay and awesome customization make this game really enjoyable. Recoil is very manageable with most weapons, and honestly, the movement, the stability, it's a huge step up from previous Battlefields. Though this game has its flaws, I kinda tend to blame the community more than the game. It's pretty polished and runs very well. There's definitely advantages to this game, such as the usual engineer hiding behind a tank and repairing it during combat, but for the most part, there isn't a lot of meta in the game. And I don't mean to completely bring down the community of Battlefield, but honestly, just a couple tend to ruin it for the rest. But once again, it's not that overwhelming. It's pretty easily tolerable. The sniping definitely needs a little bit of improvement, but honestly, the more you play, the more you get acclimated, and the better you get. I'm really excited for the release of this game. I think that the last two Battlefields were fun, but had a very clear shelf life. With the return of a story mode and a supposed battle royale, I think this game will have a really good takeoff. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and pay attention to any new content coming out. I'll be doing some live streams and a little bit more videos. Thanks so much for taking a little bit of time out of your day. See you soon.